If you spend enough time hanging out in leftist spaces on social media, you're bound to come across a sentiment along the lines of, if you see someone stealing food, no you didn't. Sometimes the meme is narrowed down to make it more clear that it's in support of the especially vulnerable, and that the target of the theft is presumably a big corporate entity with deep pockets. If you see someone shoplifting baby formula, no you didn't, is a popular variant. And while there is a very real debate one could have about the potential deleterious impact that endorsing shoplifting might have on a community, it is a sentiment that comes from a well-meaning place, a place born of empathy and compassion for those in need. More to the point of this episode, though, it's a sentiment that corresponds with the notion of what sometimes gets called social banditry. Simply put, social banditry is when there is societal support, usually from an oppressed group, for actions that are illegal, but may be considered morally justified. Shoplifting baby formula is illegal, but it's immoral to let an infant starve. Both real and imagined outlaws are sometimes classified as social bandits, especially if, like a certain archer clad in Lincoln green, they've developed a reputation for robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. Welcome to the Greenwood. I'm your host, Thaddeus Papke, and this is the podcast where we peek under the hood of the most famous outlaw who may have never been. From archers to archaeologists, we interview subject matter experts to learn why the figure of Robin Hood continues to endure and consider what we can learn by examining what is known as the matter of the Greenwood. Early in the summer of 2025, the International Association for Robin Hood Studies held its 15th biennial conference. This was a hybrid conference with attendees meeting in person at Jagiellonian University in Poland and joining online from around the world. The broad theme for the conference, on which dozens of academics presented research, was Robin Hood and Other Social Bandits in Folk and Popular Culture. The term social bandit was coined by historian Eric Hobsbawm and used in his book Primitive Rebels in 1959, and also in his book Bandits from 1969. Keen-eared listeners of the podcast might recall that the book Bandits was mentioned during episode 41 of the podcast, in which Dr. Min-Soo Kang joined me for a discussion of Hong Gil-dong, a rather fantastical example of a popular social bandit from Korea. An episode that is definitely well worth a listen. In the book Bandits, Hobsbawm describes social bandits thusly. The point about social bandits is that they are peasant outlaws, whom the lord and state regard as criminals, but who remain within peasant society and are considered by their people as heroes, as champions, avengers, fighters for justice, perhaps even leaders of liberation, and in any case, as men to be admired, helped, and supported. This relation between the ordinary peasant and the rebel, outlaw, and robber is what makes social banditry interesting and significant. Social banditry of this kind is one of the most universal social phenomena known to history. Now, it's worth noting that there has been some important criticism of Hobsbawm's theory, especially in regards to his focus on rural communities, and how often the image of the supposed popular hero of the common folk gets used by political forces to promote nationalistic identities. But it's precisely because there is so much universal appeal to the idea of the social bandit, and because these figures, including historical ones like William Wallace, and fictional ones like Hong Gil-dong, can become intertwined with national identity, that the study of the origins and uses of these figures can be surprisingly relevant in our day-to-day lives. To discuss the importance of this scholarship and its related public outreach, I spoke with Anna Czarnowus, one of the organizers of this year's conference for the International Association for Robin Hood Studies. This interview was conducted in late June, immediately following the conclusion of the conference. During our discussion, you'll hear references to Yuri Janosik and to the Haiduks. Janosik was a highwayman from the Kingdom of Hungary who led a small gang of thieves in the early 18th century before being captured and executed. By the 19th century, legends of Janosik had become popular around what is now Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland. Janosik is now remembered as a beloved figure who robbed wealthy merchants, behaved chivalrously towards women, and shared his plunder with the poor. He has been the subject of dozens of poems, books, plays, and films, including the very first Slovakian motion picture in 1921, a year before Douglas Fairbanks' Robin Hood film. What's more, during the Slovak National Uprising, which was part of the anti-Nazi resistance movement during World War II, one of the Slovakian partisan groups was named after Janosik. He so much fits the criteria that Hobsbawm identified that if one goes to the Wikipedia page for social banditry, they will see a depiction of Yuri Janosik. The Haiduks, about whom Professor Czarnowus gave a presentation at the conference, were Central European infantrymen active between the 16th century to the mid-19th century. They came to be characterized by the Ottoman Empire as roving gangs of armed bandits, while being thought of as freedom fighters who targeted the wealthy Turks occupying their homelands by the locals. The inhabitants of towns and villages who would help provide aid to the Haiduks were called Yataks. The Yataks, who were often poor peasants, would be thanked by a share of the plunder that the Haiduks seized from the Ottomans, which, of course, makes them examples of being social bandits as well. So, string your bow, consider what acts of banditry you might consider socially acceptable, and join me in the Greenwood with Professor Anna Czarnowus as we discuss the importance of studying Robin Hood and his fellow social bandits following the 2025 International Association for Robin Hood Studies Conference. Hello.
Good to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you. Nice to get to see you not just in, the big conference room setting there.
Yeah, so I'm back home. And where are you right now? Where do you live?
I'm in Cardiff in the UK.
Oh, I see.
Yes, and where is home for you?
It's close to Katowice, so it's like 1 hour drive from Krakow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me here. I was so happy that I was able to attend some of the sessions for the 15th biennial conference for the International Association for Robin Hood Studies. Thank you so much for helping organize it and put it on.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, because we needed this audience who could ask us questions and somehow, participate in the experience, so that it would not be just, the all participants event.
Yes, I think that's always wonderful when that can be done. I mean, so my job is sort of public scholar adjacent. I work in science museums, and so I'm all about trying to find ways to bring information to the public, bring public into the various discussions that are happening on the podcast. I'm doing it a lot with medieval studies, and I'm doing it, with the idea of Robin Hood and Robin Hood studies. And in my day job, I'm doing it with various scientific ideas and processes and new discoveries.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, this is what Will Hoff told me, right? Or, text me.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Yes, Will Hoff's a good friend of the show. He's been on several times.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, he's a great person, and he's been very active in the field. And even though he's a young scholar, he contributed so much to the field that, I'm always grateful whenever, for example, he wants to participate in a session that I'm organizing. So it's always great, right? That's one of the people whom I can rely on, right? So it's great this way.
What I'm hoping to do now is using the podcast kind of more to that end, just to kind of help let the listeners of the podcast know what the International Association for Robin Hood Studies is and know more about these biennial conferences. But let's start just a little bit with who you are. If you could just kind of introduce yourself and your position and then how you got involved.
I work as an associate professor at the Faculty of Humanities of the University of Silesia in Katowice in Poland. And throughout my whole career, I've been a medieval studies scholar. Yet another interest of mine is, medievalism studies, which means that I think around 10 years ago, I started to contribute to the field of the study of medievalism with its various aspects. So, for example, one of my projects was Canadian or English Canadian medievalists. Yet another was New Zealand medievalists. I have also co-edited a volume on George R.R. Martin's medievalist fantasy. Yet another interest of mine is, for example, Slavic medievalism. And before that, I have published on Chaucer, monstrosity, the post-colonial aspects of medieval or Middle English literature. My first contact with the Robin Hood scholars was, I think, exactly 10 years ago when I came to Leeds, and this is where I met them. And, I've been active in the field, from that time onwards. So.
Yeah, fantastic. We've had a lot of medievalists on recently, and so that's been a kind of big topic on the podcast is medievalisms in particular.
Yeah, and I think this topic is important because with the gradual waning of the field of medieval studies in the academia, especially in terms of teaching, I think it's important to popularize both the historical Middle Ages and those echoes of the Middle Ages medievalisms.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I have been doing that as well, right? I think it's a way of popularizing things and, discussing things across various cultural periods, but also, discussing how it's been working in various countries. Even though yet another aspect of it is that perhaps, Louise Darson wrote in her chapter, in the chapter that we put as the last one in New Zealand Medievalists Reframing the Medieval, so the edited collection for Routledge. So she said that perhaps, discussing those national medievalisms is, after all, not such a good thing for various reasons, including the political ones. Or she thinks that there should be more focus on what herself and Andrew Lynch called international medievalists, or simply on those global medievalisms.
It's certainly a very timely topic right now. I mean, it's not going away in terms of popular culture, and popular culture influences so much of how people think. As of the date of this recording, it's exactly a week after the large No Kings protests that were happening all over the US. So this idea of thinking about medievalisms in particular is extraordinarily relevant, much more so than people are consciously aware of. Like they're clearly thinking about it. It's clearly there, or else those protests wouldn't have been called No Kings, with images of very stereotypical medieval crowns, with the band mark slashed through them. So it's like it's there in people's minds, but there's not the connection that they're drawing to how it relates to academic study.
So I think that the task of us, so medieval studies scholars and medievalism scholars, is really to somehow try to theorize what is happening in the field of politics, but also, in various societies with those protests, or, try to make people aware of the existence of certain ideologies, which unfortunately rely on the warped image of the Middle Ages. Well, and I mean, for example, white supremacism, but not only. Well, there are other ideologies, but perhaps I won't go into details at this point. Yet another task for us scholars is to show the connection between how medieval studies developed as a scholarly discipline in the 19th century at various academias, how that arose from the interest in the medieval that perhaps was not scholarly yet but amateurish, and how this academic interest somehow culminated in popularizing the medieval with its various aspects, and perhaps the general public is not really aware of those connections. So that's a phenomenon that Janet Wilson and also I called academic medievalism, right? By which we meant, this amateur interest in the medieval that led to the emergence of the medieval studies, and then somehow we both saw it as something that resulted from the interest, the more popular interest. Then there was the academia, but then it spread onto other fields as well, such as, for example, already in the 19th century there was the Gothic revival architecture, which we think should be related to what Janet called academic medievalism in her chapter, and we restated that in the introduction. I don't think it's something that is those connections are widely known or realized.
No, I definitely not to the wider public, certainly.
So, that's one of the reasons why the editors keep pushing, are like, the general editors or series editors keep pushing the editors of volumes to write introductions that will be somehow, clear to a more general reader, to someone simply interested in the topic, but not someone involved in the academia. And we're fine with that, right? So we generally think that such things should be popularized.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the perfect places for Robin Hood to come in, because Robin Hood is such a familiar figure and has such pop culture resonance. And while the way we connect with Robin Hood is through forms of medievalisms, that's kind of always how we've known him. That's how the Victorians, it's how people in the 16th century interfaced with him, and just their versions of medievalisms. But it's got that popular appeal. It's got that draw. Did you see the news stories that were going around very briefly about the opening of the Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie from 2010 on Amazon, and how they had left out the text? Yeah.
For political reasons, right? So that was not related to politics somehow.
Right.
This is at least what I get at. Right. But, I think that, the Robin Hood tradition is very interesting from the point of view of medievalist studies, because it started in the Middle Ages. The texts preserved are not that old. And somehow, they already preserve the folk tradition that was in existence earlier. But then practically each literary or cultural period started to create their own Robin Hoods for the purposes that were, well, not just, literary, but also social. So there was, for example, the question of the gentrification of Robin Hood. The questions were political. We know how it worked in England, that, England kept thinking about various medieval figures in a way that was ultimately instrumental, right? I think the most widely known example is Robin Hood in Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. But, if we take a look at the 19th century, there are other medieval figures that started to be very much used instrumentally. So that was not just the question of King Arthur, but also King Alfred the Great. And somehow, yet another use was artistic, but then it's debatable to what extent that could be free from ideology, right? So, well, that's something that Robin Hood scholars called, the mutable ideologies that kept being associated with the Robin Hood tradition. And we know that right now, well, as you rightly said, Robin Hood keeps being very much present in the popular imagination, including fantasy literature. Fortunately, that was reflected in the program of the conference. Well,
yes.
Obviously, not all the papers were devoted to Robin Hood because the topic was more general, but the ones that were devoted to Robin Hood, I think, reflected this interest in this figure throughout various literary periods or cultural periods in general really well. So
yes. And the topic was for this conference was Robin Hood and other social bandits in folk and popular culture.
Yeah, so the actual papers that were contributed to the program of the conference on other, social bandits, as I called it, in the call for papers, were Edric Sylvaticus, Eustace the Monk. There was also a paper on, the fictitious but widely known Gemelin. I tried to extend as if the geographical field of investigation by introducing the historical haiduks from the Bulgarian history. Obviously, I did not do it myself, but with my colleague, Professor Joanna Mleczko, so a Bulgarian studies scholar from my university, right? But I think that this field needs to be extended, right? And I try to extend the field in the more distant past by writing, for example, about the Slovak outlaw Janosik, who perhaps is more recognizable than the Bulgarian haiduks, even though for me, these two groups of outlaws, so, the Bulgarian haiduks, so the outlaws from the mountains on the one hand, and Janosik as a representative of the Tatra Mountains outlaws, somehow, there are those similarities. And what was very good, I think, throughout the conference is that we managed to find similarities between those various legends. For example, by our talking in the question session, or in the question part of each session about the sleepers in the mountains and such things, right? So somehow I think we managed to extend the discussion even further.
Yeah,
hopefully.
It's a fascinating topic, and I at some point would like to drill down deeper kind of on all of these sorts of social bandit figures. And what I think is also really interesting, though, is the contrast between the ones that are purely kind of more of a literary and folkloric bent, like Robin Hood, versus the ones that are perhaps there is some folklore built around them, but they are very manifestly real people. Like Dick Turpin came up at one point during the conference of like, yeah, some people kind of tried to make some stories about him. And there was even a very silly TV show about him that came out last year starring Noel Fielding. But he was a verifiable real person who did terrible things. So there comes a point where it's like, well, how much can we turn a hero out of a person when we know they did terrible things versus taking the literary figures like Robin Hood and saying, well, we can have them be whatever we want them to be. They can be the heroic outlaw that we want for the time and place that we want them to be. And I think that's a topic that's really interesting to explore.
Yeah, and I think that, it's similar with, for example, Slovakian Janosik, who was born in the first half of the 18th century. And well, what is interesting about Janosik is that he died very young. He was definitely an outlaw and, definitely a criminal that perhaps did not deserve the cruel death. So being hanged by the rib, right? And well, that somehow contributed to the legend. But what is interesting is that in the part of the world where I live, I don't live in Slovakia, but I live in the southwest of Poland. But well, what is important is that somehow those outlaws became transnational figures. So fewer poets wrote about Janosik, in Slovakian than than in Poland, because in Poland we had this well-developed romantic tradition, and at the beginning of the 19th century there was a need to romanticize some outlaw figures and make them perhaps a bit like fighters for freedom from the usurpers, from the invaders, for those who dominated Poland. So somehow, I think those outlaw legends are very much prone to appropriation. But again, that shows the political nature of both those legends to a large extent, and how can they be used for specific ideological purposes.
Yeah, and the importance for people to have a figure that exists outside of authoritative frameworks to latch onto.
Yeah, particularly in specific historical circumstances. So I think the field of outlaw studies needs to be, somehow extended in that direction as well. Because at one of the sessions, one of the speakers stated that nationalism is all about thinking highly about your own nation and looking down on others. But perhaps, in the 19th century, there were all those nations which were in existence, but without the countries or, without the states. As political entities, and there were also those various nations which were not even nations, because they started to think about themselves in this way in the 19th century, which somehow fueled certain political actions that they undertook in order to liberate themselves from usurpers. And well, that's an example of those Bulgarian haiduks.
Yeah. I'm afraid I don't know anything really about the Bulgarian haiduks. Janosik is a fascinating figure who I've really enjoyed reading about and would like to read more about him, but I'm afraid I don't know about the haiduks.
Well, so I think this research deserves to be done because, it was mainly done in Bulgarian, and there's a lot of confusion about the etymology of the word. Somehow, this word is widely known in the region, but it turns out that, the word derives ultimately from Hungarian, where it simply meant an infantry soldier, and where I live, so in Poland, it started to mean a servant dressed up as an infantry soldier. So it's, somehow, in research, there is a lot of confusion, and I think that there's a need for popularizing such, phenomena from the outlaw tradition as well. Well, because they hardly accessible even to the people who do the research in Bulgarian, right?
Right.
There is this, domination of the English language, criticism, and when most of the research happens in English, that's to the disadvantage of, those other fields, right, that deserve to be studied. And I think it's interesting for, for the English-speaking people as well.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's absolutely a shame that it can be hard to come across any of these things. Even here in Wales, learning about Tom Sean Cotty or other Robin Hood type figures, said a little bit with quotation marks there, can be hard to come across. It is just easier to find the things that predominate from that spread outward from the English speaking world. And I, as much as I love Robin Hood, I really am wanting to try to use the podcast to pull on a lot of the other threads that I can find. I was really happy to have Minsu Kang on last year to talk about Hong Gil-dong from Korea. And really, as much as he gets that figure, Hong Gil-dong, gets called the Robin Hood of Korea, he is still an incredibly unique figure. And in that case, that's another purely literal one, or literary one. But it takes that little bit of like, well, we're going to start with this thing that at least people know or have heard of, and then try to point towards it. And that's something that I'm glad that the conference is being able to do as well, that it can use Robin Hood as this sort of umbrella, but it's welcoming a lot of these other concepts and studies and figures into that umbrella as well.
Yeah, that was a point that was made a few years ago by Professor Richard Utz when he was speaking at the International Congress for Medieval Studies in Kalamazoo. And he said, well, why do we talk about those various outlaws as, for example, I don't know, a Korean Robin Hood or a Slovak Robin Hood? Then perhaps, that should be the other way around, right?
Right. This Robin Hood, he's the English Janoschik,
Yeah. So, well, that's precisely the point, right?
Yeah.
And in the mountains that are close, both to Krakow and to Katowice, well, there were other outlaws of the type, right? So apart from Janosik, who's more widely known, there was also Andraszek. So
yeah.
Another mountain or outlaw from the mountains, and in the case of those mountains, there was no question of the national identification. So those people did not necessarily define themselves as Slovaks or Poles or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is important that they were the people who probably defined themselves as, well, we are the people from here, right? Whatever the borders are, whatever happens in the world of politics, whatever artificial geography is, adopted by the rulers, we are the people from here.
Right. And that's a really good example of just the reality of on the ground, who these people are and their lived experience, as a contrast to what you were talking about earlier about how Robin Hood gets used and sometimes even converted into this nationalistic figure. And, you brought up Sir Walter Scott, and you get, in these later traditions with Robin Hood, the whole Saxon versus Norman, and we're preserving England for good King Richard to come back, and all of those things, none of which are in the earlier Robin Hood stories, but it's that because he is existing in the ether as this literary figure, people were able to take him and use him for those purposes that either they found useful from a propaganda perspective, or just because it's what spoke to them. Even if it wasn't a conscientious, we're trying to do a piece of propaganda, it's just, this is what we think is going to appeal to us as the writers or to our audience.
Well, I remember just before Brexit that there was this dichotomy of the Saxon and the Norman brought into play in the world of politics again. And when I came to my first medievalist conference, which was the conference of the International Society for the Study of Medievalists in Bamberg, I think it was 9 years ago. Then, we discussed it, right? We discussed it on the example of King Snow's The Wake, but somehow this discussion started to be broader because, somehow, well, with this Brexit or pre-Brexit propaganda, well, that started to be very much relevant, which showed it to us how important our research can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so somehow I think that we keep balancing, well, our work, and we do research which is specialized, but I think well, such fields as the Robin Hood studies or medievalism studies try to bring those topics closer to the general public. Or this is
Yeah.
at least what we hope we're doing.
Yes, me too. Me too. So the conference that just wrapped up, it was 2 days. And do you know offhand how many speakers there were and from how many different countries? I've got the
Yeah.
schedule pulled up here, but I haven't like gone through and counted all of them. I was impressed by the number of speakers. It was really quite a lot.
Yeah, so I think we ultimately had 10 speakers live, and we should be having 16 live, and I think one person did not give a paper, but I think that was still a lot, right? So somehow we managed to advertise the topic adequately, I think. I made a list of the countries from which the speakers came, and that was, Poland, but also, well, a lot of scholars from the United States. The UK was represented, Australia was represented. We had a speaker from Brazil. Well, so ultimately 2 speakers did not turn up, right? But I was very much looking forward to a discussion of well, a discussion by a scholar from Morocco, but it was about South Indian outlaws anyway.
Mm.
And as I was preparing the conference, so, in the last year, I came across people who said they were familiar with, for example, Asian outlaws living in the mountains. So the specific examples I was given is that there were whole groups of Chinese outlaws from the mountains. Or I emailed a colleague, and she wrote me that, well, she used to talk to Japanese, to her students about Japanese outlaws because she's a professor emerita in Japan. So somehow, when I talk to various people I met when organizing the conference, they were very much interested in the topic, and they talked about the specific examples that they had, right? And importantly, they used those examples when teaching the students because they wanted, for example, when they teach English literature, which both means, English literature and American literature, they want
Mm-hmm.
to somehow enliven the discussion of specific, medieval figures from the English literature by talking about those examples that were simply closer to the students. So I think that it's not just, we try to popularize those topics, but, well, people in other regions of the world who work in education do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's such an interesting topic.
It is. Everybody loves an outlaw. And it is, I think, fantastic that the conference is as international as it is. And I hope it continues to grow in that way and continue to bring in a lot more of those sorts of perspectives from around the world. And it's not a conference that is tied to a particular university, though, right? Its location tends to move. It's held every 2 years. So this year was there in Poland. Where will it be in 2 years from now?
the tradition is that, it's always in the United States, 2 years afterwards, it's in Europe. So it means that it has to be in the United States again. And hopefully it will be organized in a hybrid format so that at least some of the participants could meet in person, right? But if not, for some reasons, it's not organized in the hybrid format, then definitely it can be organized online, because during the pandemic that was done very successfully, and the organizers were Leslie Coot at the time, or I don't remember if she was if she was an associate at the time, but she used to work at the University of Hull, and the other organizer was Stephen Bezdeo, again from the UK. And that was very much successful. So during the pandemic, we were very happy that we could discuss those topics, at least online. Right.
And one of the things that's wonderful about this particular conference, when it comes to attending it either in person or virtually, is that it's free.
Yeah. So I think this formula makes this event more open to the people who are independent scholars. I think we very much need young scholars, right? Who are new to the field, to contribute to this field. So somehow, I'm already in the group of those people who are middle-aged. So now I'm not such a young scholar any longer, and I was very happy that we had some very young people at the conference, right, with very bright questions, right. One of them gave a very good paper.
Yeah, I certainly appreciated that there was quite a diversity of age ranges, as well as locations that people were from, and topics, a lot that were drilling into medieval history and literature that was specific to Robin Hood, and some things about Robin Hood media, but also, as we were discussing before, social bandit figures from other locations, but also some pop culture discussion as well, talking about the Free State of Jones movie and its connections to Robin Hood, and how the medievalisms that people in the South experience, largely due to their latching onto Ivanhoe. And a lot of different topics were being explored that made it feel really rich to attend. Certainly felt like
Yes.
I was going to hear something new and different with each speaker.
Yeah, and I think that, Robin Hood on film is such an interesting topic that, it can be discussed endlessly, really. Yeah. And that, and
As
that's
somebody who does that,
I mean,
yes.
for example, Robin of Sherwood is a TV series that a lot of people recognize, right? So, in my part of the world, that's the first association, and the way in which can be discussed is really very, very much open to various interpretations. And I think what is good about discussing the most recent renderings of the Robin Hood legend is that the Robin Hood tradition can be found both in fantasy literature and, for example, in young adult fiction, and research on medievalisms in young adult fiction again deserves to be developed a lot, right, on the ground of various literatures in various languages. So I'm really happy that that was done during the conference as well, right? That was presented, I think, adequately.
Oh yeah,
we had such great contributors, such great speakers with the topics.
Yes, as somebody who's been running this podcast for a couple of years now, it is hard to bring up the topic of Robin Hood without somebody immediately making a comment relating to their favorite film version.
Yeah.
Like that is going to be
those opinions are so different from one another that there's always some opportunity for discussing those films, right?
Yes, and it's very generational too, and very based on where and when you grew up. The Nottingham County Council did a survey earlier this year about people's associations with Robin Hood and like how they had like what they're bringing to the table. You know, in science communication, we talk about science capital or like this kind of suitcase that people bring to a discussion. So it's a little bit about like what is the Robin Hood capital that people have. And they found, much to their surprise, that the vast majority of the like instant film recognition and like this is our iconic Robin Hood from the survey recipients responders related to like the Errol Flynn film from the 1930s.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
that was
they
my first contact with the legend as well. Can you imagine? Right. So,
but they speaking of
before,
age though, they found out that that was like the demographics of their survey takers skewed much older. And then when they did focus groups on college campuses, that shot way down and it was much more like the Disney cartoon.
I think the Errol Flynn adaptation is very much interesting, and unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to ask this question during the conference, but because there was no time for this. But somehow, what I appreciate about this very adaptation is that it started to be discussed in the light of the 1930s ideologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
how those dangerous ideologies could be well reflected in the film, which kept being marketed as something very much innocent, right? Like, their real Robin Hood. And the result is that, some readings are that, perhaps those much more recent adaptations are better because you have some, for example, actors of color introduced, and that is definitely better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or somehow there is this question of some sort of purity that, as a slogan for the 1930s, and we know how it ended, right? Respectively in 1939 or, well,
Yeah.
1940, 41, well, depending on which
Yeah.
perspective or which country you mean, right? But somehow, how the growth of Nazism and communism could be somehow seen as something underpinning this adaptation. I was thinking about these ideologies when Sharon Lax was talking about Maid Marian in this adaptation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps that the presentation of Maid Marian somehow was affected by those ideologies of gender that were very much present really in various cultures before the Second World War, so when this film was made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, very much. It's a movie that I grew up with and I really am extremely fond of and I deeply love it, but I can't deny that one could really read into it a sort of American isolationist lens that was extremely prevalent in the late 1930s when it was being made. I like the line where Robin tells King Richard, "Oh, yes, I'll condemn Holy Crusade. I'll condemn anything that brings the king away from his country and away from his people and leave it in the hands of outlaws like me." And like, oh, that's a great line, like in the context of this movie. But then when you expand out a little bit and get to the context of what was happening in the world at that time with the Nazi Germany, like building up its war machine and everybody being aware that war with Germany was really imminent, but it was also going to happen in Europe. It wasn't at America's doorstep yet. So they're saying, like, yeah, that shouldn't be a thing that we're going to worry about. It's like, you can't deny that that's not there.
Yeah, and the communism from the East as this other force somehow, right? So, well, you can see this word that keeps, I think, well, getting as if smaller and smaller for me, right? So, well, but perhaps, these are my own associations, right? Well, but when watching this film right now, well, you could see those racial ideologies and the eugenics as something that was very much popular in the 1930s. So you can have a wealth of associations when watching a film that, as a teenager, I thought was, like a version of Robin Hood for children or something like that, right?
Right.
It's not for children so much.
Yeah. No, as you say, it is a topic that one can discuss endlessly. I've been watching every single adaptation that I can find in chronological order and reviewing them on the podcast. We're just wrapping up our coverage of the Robin of Sherwood series, but it was fascinating to find things like a 1976 film that was produced in Russia and seeing the take they were bringing to the table and how the film boards of the USSR did not let it be released under its original version.
Well, so I think the Russian medievalists, so something that we managed to cover with my co-editor, Lauren Ryan, who's Canadian, but she's working in the US, is something that deserves to be studied separately because Slavic medievalisms are a bit different. For example, one of our contributors, Pavel Byczkov, wrote about medievalism as a strategy in the Soviet Union that was adopted by people in order to, as if, demonstrate their dissent or with the politics of the time, with the system, with the ideology, but also, so perhaps, practicing medievalisms have always been an escapist strategy to some extent, right? But in the Soviet Union, that started to be done more consciously in order to include some content that couldn't be included in another place, or in order to show the interest in respectively, what was the West for the people in the Soviet Union, so both the Baltic countries and Poland, or simply to show their interest in the culture of the actual, Western Europe. And that was the case of translating Tolkien, which was, unofficial at first, even illegal, right? So there were those Samizdat and Tamizdat translations that were published unofficially, at home and abroad, right? Because these are the meanings of the two terms. And so somehow in the Soviet Union, that was actually a strategy of dissent, right? Saying no to what was happening around you. And there are other studies about that. So there are at least 2 monographs that appeared recently, published in the new series by the Arc Humanities Press, and the title of the new, or the name of the new series is The Arc Medievalist. And somehow, so the topic of the role of medievalists in the Soviet Union and in the present day Russian Federation starts to be explored as well, which is very good, because it shows this, diversity within Russian culture.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, just to bring it back a little bit to the conference, were there any particular highlights for you about the structure of the event, or the way it all came together?
Well, it all came together as a collaborative effort between my university, the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Silesia, where I work, and the Renaissance Lab at the Faculty of Polish Studies of the Jagiellonian University. And the first time I started to be in touch with the Renaissance Lab was 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago, when I was a PhD student, and I attended the seminar that was given by Professor Andrzej Borowski, and it had a very wide formula. So I was as a someone in English studies and medieval studies, I was very much welcome. And we've been cooperating ever since. And well, I think that the Renaissance Lab at the Jagiellonian University was a very good place to organize it. And I think that those who were present there in person were able to admire the beauty of the medieval buildings there. So somehow, well, this is how it all started. Even though this is not the only opportunity to discuss the Robin Hood tradition and the outlaw tradition, because apart from the biennial conferences, there are those association or IARHS sponsored sessions at the International Congress for Medieval Studies in Kalamazoo, the International Medieval Congress in Leeds. There is the South Medieval Association Conference, and there's also the Pacific Division of MLA. Right. So somehow, I wanted to create yet another opportunity for the members of the association and the Robin Hood scholars in general, and the outlaw studies scholars, to present the research, right? So I think this is how it all came together. And I think that advertising such scholarly events is very good, because we hope to attract more members to the association, even though I think right now, after this conference, the number of members could be, somehow below 190 people, perhaps. So I think that's a lot. But we want to attract new scholars so that they participated in such events, but also those other sessions at other scholarly congresses and conferences as well.
I love that you've got a lot of hopes for what will be in the future for the conferences. Besides some of the topics that we've discussed, are there any places that you're hoping to see these studies go in the future?
What is important is that we also, within the association, we need contributions to our journal, which is the bulletin of the association that is available in open access, and it's available online. So somehow, well, the conference proceedings will be published in one of the issues. And I think that those two fields, so the Robin Hood studies and the outlaw studies, should be developed, not necessarily independently from each other. This is my idea, right? So perhaps the Robin Hood studies could really use the research that is done within the outlaw studies and the other way around. And perhaps the outlaw studies could be popularized by bringing up the figure of Robin Hood.
Yes, exactly. So if people wanted to find the journal or find out more about this conference or other conferences, how would you recommend they go about doing that?
I recommend they contact Alexander Kaufman and also Valerie Johnson, or there are specific Facebook sites where all the information can be found, right? So that they could become members as well, and somehow support this research by at least participating in the conferences, like in the form of the audience, but perhaps they could contribute in a scholarly way as well.
Yeah,
this association is very much open, right? So there is a group of people who are simply independent scholars and they do this research.
Right.
I think this is important.
And I felt very welcome to attend virtually in my case, and observe and ask questions during the question asking sessions. So even though I don't have any university affiliation or anything myself, I still felt very welcome to be there and participate. And any questions I had were certainly fully validated by the scholars there who are sharing their research.
Well, we're very happy to have you and other people in the audience. Yeah.
And I'll make sure to include some of the links, like to the Facebook groups and to anything else I can find in the episode description for this episode of the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, because I think, well, this is something that needs to be, well, advertised even further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know lots of people who would love to even just sit in and watch some of the sessions.
Yeah, and I think that the questions from the from the listeners are also, well, very much insightful, right? Because perhaps what stands behind all those people is their genuine interest in those topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck on your trip to China, and I hope to see you at some conferences in the future.
Yeah, so please feel welcome at all the sessions organized by the association, and also at biannual conferences. And thank you very much for well, talking to me about all those things and allowing me to say a few words, right, from well.
Yeah,
About the things
absolutely.
I know, yeah, something like that, or I've written about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, clearly your knowledge and passion really comes through, and it's absolutely delightful.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Yeah, same to you. Bye-bye.
My thanks again to Anna Czarnowus for joining me in the Greenwood. If you'd like to learn more about the International Association for Robin Hood Studies, I will include a link in the episode description where you can see announcements for proposals at various medieval conferences and a list of all the presentations given at this year's conference on Robin Hood and other social bandits in folk and popular culture. On this podcast, we've barely scratched the surface on all of the various social bandit figures to be found around the world. If there's one that you'd especially like us to focus on at some point, then please get in touch. You can find us on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, all with the handle @intogreenwood. Or you can email us directly using intogreenwood@gmail.com. There's also a Robin Hood-centric Discord server where we play games, share photos, organize watch parties, and run a book club. As of this recording, the book we're currently reading is In a Dark Wood by Michael Cadnam. Just reach out via one of the methods mentioned above if you'd like an invitation. Another location where you can find all sorts of bonus content is patreon.com/intogreenwood. Recently, Patreon made a change that allowed us to migrate to a monthly subscription service, which I'm very, very happy about. Please check out our various reward tiers, where you too can be a stout yeoman for a mere $1 a month, and in so doing, help us keep the lights on here in the Greenwood. If you'd like to show your support and appreciation, but aren't so sure about committing to a recurring donation, we also have an account at buymeacoffee.com/intogreenwood. Each and every dollar means so much to us right now, and we remain committed to partnering with top-rated charities such as Trees, Water, and People, with whom we always give 10% of any earnings. You can find a link in the episode description if you'd like to find out more about their work, and maybe make a donation to them directly. Of course, non-monetary support is also extremely valuable. As a small independent podcast, every single rating, review, or share makes a huge impact, both in terms of growing our audience and in terms of letting us know that all the work going into this podcast is being appreciated. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. Our theme music is by Plastic 3. No portion of this podcast has been created with the use of generative AI. That's all for now, though. So once again, I find myself wishing you all safe travels until our next journey together into the Greenwood.